For most of human history, economic power followed a simple rule: grow fast, innovate faster, and eventually slow down. But one country broke that rule in the most unusual way. It didn't collapse. It didn't fall into chaos. It didn't lose control. Instead, it froze. For more than 30 years, its economy barely moved forward. No explosive growth, no dramatic crash, just stagnation. Yet this same country once terrified the world. In the 1980s, analysts warned that it would dominate global manufacturing, that it would buy entire cities, that it would outcompete the United States, Europe, everyone. Its companies were unstoppable. Its workers were legendary. Its efficiency was unmatched. So here is the question that still puzzles economists today. How does the most disciplined, most organized, most technologically advanced society on Earth end up going nowhere for 3 decades? And more importantly, is this the future waiting for every rich country? To understand the answer, we need to stop thinking about countries and start thinking like investors. Because if Japan were a company, this would be one of the strangest corporate stories ever told. A company that did everything right and still got stuck. Let's imagine for a moment that countries are companies, not symbols, not flags, but organizations with strategies, cultures, and balance sheets. In that world, Japan would be a very unusual corporation, founded in ruins after World War II, with almost no natural resources, no energy independence, and a population struggling to survive. On paper, it looked like a company that should never have succeeded. And yet, within just a few decades, it became one of the most powerful economic machines in human history. Japan didn't sell cheap labor. It sold precision, reliability, perfection at scale. Its core products were not ideas, but execution. Cars that never broke, electronics that outperformed competitors, factories that eliminated waste down to the second. If Japan were a company, its business model would be simple: import raw materials, add extreme discipline and engineering, export world-class products. This was not a startup chasing disruption. This was a manufacturing empire built on process, patience, and control. Investors loved it. Partners trusted it. Competitors feared it. For a long time, Japan looked like the perfect company, one that had finally mastered how to turn human effort into economic power. By the late 1970s and 1980s, the company called Japan was no longer catching up. It was winning. Its factories were faster, its products were cheaper and better. Its companies were expanding across the globe. Japanese cars flooded American highways. Japanese electronics dominated living rooms in Europe. Japanese machinery became the backbone of global manufacturing. In boardrooms across the West, a quiet panic began to spread. Analysts warned that Japan had discovered a superior economic model, one built on long-term thinking, total quality control, and absolute discipline. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, politicians demanded answers. The question was no longer, can Japan compete? But can anyone compete with Japan? At its peak, Japan's companies were worth more than entire countries. Tokyo real estate alone was said to be more valuable than all the land in the United States. This was the moment Japan looked unstoppable, not as a nation, but as a corporation that had perfected industrial capitalism. From the outside, it appeared flawless, but inside the company, pressure was quietly building. To understand what happened next, we need to go inside the company. Inside Japan, everything revolved around a structure. Decisions were slow, but deliberate. Authority was respected. Consensus mattered more than a speed. Employees didn't job hop. They committed for life. The system rewarded loyalty, patience, and precision. And for decades, this culture worked perfectly. Mistakes were rare. Quality was unmatched. Processes improved year after year. But this same culture carried an invisible cost. Innovation had to pass through layers of approval. Risk was seen as failure. Standing out meant disrupting harmony. In this company, it was safer to be correct than to be bold. That mindset created world-class execution, but it quietly discouraged reinvention. When the world moved slowly, Japan dominated it. But when the world began to change faster, the company's greatest strength started to become its greatest weakness. Every great company has a moment where its internal logic is tested. For Japan, that moment arrived at the end of the 1980s. Years of success had created confidence. Confidence turned into excess. Excess turned into a bubble. Asset prices exploded. Real estate, stocks, corporate valuations. Land in Tokyo became more expensive than entire nations. Inside the company, warning signs were visible, but no one wanted to be the first to slow things down. The system that avoided mistakes now avoided uncomfortable decisions. When the bubble finally burst, the damage was immediate. Asset values collapsed. Banks were left with massive bad debts. Balance sheets stopped making sense. And suddenly, the company faced a problem it had never experienced before. Not failure, but paralysis. Leaders hesitated. Reforms were delayed. Losses were hidden instead of written off. The logic was simple. Stability first. Fix things quietly. Avoid a shock. But by protecting the system from pain, the company also protected its mistakes. What followed was not a crash, but something far more dangerous. A slow, silent erosion of momentum. After the bubble burst, most companies face a choice: admit the damage, absorb the losses, and rebuild. The company called Japan chose a different path. It refused to collapse. Banks were kept alive, companies were protected, jobs were preserved. On the surface, everything looked stable. But beneath that stability, growth quietly disappeared. Year after year, prices barely moved, wages stagnated, investment slowed. Economists would later call this period the lost decades, not because Japan failed, but because it never truly recovered. The system prioritized continuity over transformation, safety over disruption. Weak companies were not allowed to fail. Strong companies had little reason to take risks. Capital stayed trapped. Innovation slowed. Productivity gains faded. The company wasn't dying, it was surviving. And in a fast-moving global economy, survival without growth is its own kind of decline. Every company eventually learns a hard truth. Capital can be replaced. Technology can be upgraded. Systems can be restructured. People cannot. Inside Japan, the workforce was changing in ways no policy could reverse. The population was aging. The number of young workers was shrinking. Entire industries began to feel understaffed. Fewer workers meant fewer consumers. Fewer consumers meant weaker demand. Weaker demand discouraged investment. It was a slow feedback loop, and it moved in only one direction. At the same time, the company struggled to adapt its talent model. Lifetime employment reduced mobility. Seniority mattered more than creativity. Immigration remained limited. Younger employees played safe. Older leadership stayed in control. The company still had brilliant engineers, dedicated workers, deep institutional knowledge, but it lacked something essential for renewal: fresh pressure. In a global economy driven by speed, flexibility, and risk-taking, Japan's human system was optimized for this stability, not reinvention. And no matter how strong a balance sheet looks, a company cannot outgrow its people. While Japan was protecting the stability, the rest of the world was changing the rules. New competitors didn't copy Japan's model. They rewrote it. The United States doubled down on innovation and risk. China scaled faster than anyone thought possible. South Korea learned to move quickly and break tradition when needed. These companies weren't perfect, but they were aggressive. They allowed failure. They rewarded speed. They pushed capital toward the future, not the past. Inside Japan, the contrast became impossible to ignore. Japanese firms were still respected, still profitable, still reliable, but they were no longer setting the pace in a market that now rewarded software over hardware, platforms over products, and disruption over refinement. Japan found itself competing with a game it never designed to play. So the real question is not whether Japan failed. The question is whether it can change, because this company still owns assets others don't: deep engineering talent, control over critical supply chains, mastery of precision manufacturing. In areas like robotics, materials, science, and advanced components, Japan remains essential to the global economy. But reinvention requires more than capability. It requires uncomfortable decisions, faster leadership turnover, more room for risk, a system that rewards new ideas, not just proven ones. For Japan, the challenge is cultural as much as economic. The company must decide what it values more: stability or momentum. Because in the modern economy, standing still is no longer neutral, it is a choice. Japan's story is not just about Japan, it is a warning and a mirror, a reminder that success can become a trap, that systems built for excellence can resist change, and that stability, when protected for too long, can quietly erase ambition. If Japan were a company, it would not be bankrupt, but it would be facing the hardest decision of its life, whether to preserve what made it great or to risk losing control in order to grow again. And that raises a final question. If you were the CIO, what would you change first? Because the future Japan is struggling with today. Maybe the future many wealthy countries are heading toward next.